today's focus is really on accounts payable automation or accounts payable in general, really as a foundation to a successful program. So Amy, I thought maybe you could kind of kick us off a little bit, maybe a little bit of an intro, and then just really share something or some of the frankly the journey that you've been engaged in inside of the procurement industry, and then if you can expand maybe on how you've seen AP evolve over the course of that, if that works.
I know where Kevin was headed with that. So Kevin, you cut out a little bit there, but welcome everyone. But I am Amy Drakes. I'm currently the Director of Indirect Procurement for Corteva AgriScience, located in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I have been using SAP and other systems since probably 2004 to do requisitioning and AP and basically using Ariba with its portfolio to manage business. So a little bit about the procurement and AP journey that I've seen is back in the mid 90s, I worked for a Fortune 50, and you had pods of 6 to 10 people who would get paper invoices in, and they would be color coding the invoice with special shorthand and special pens so that you could walk them over to a data entry person who would then enter in all these invoices with the discount dates, the date of the invoice, invoice number, supplier code, things like that. And now what I see is, as time has gone on, is we've evolved to essentially a PO flip process or so much automation that we're so dependent on the automation, sometimes we don't know when things break. Sometimes we get into a situation where half of our company is using Ariba, SAP, and the other half is still on a legacy system that is really not accepting anything electronic. So I think it's really interesting to see that in 30 years, we've gone from paper invoices and people marking them up for data entry to companies being able to take their ERP to talk to our ERP and send in invoices that nobody has to touch and they're processed automatically.
Amy, I think as you've kind of expounded a little bit on that evolution, one of the things that always amused/horrified me as we would kick off these procurement program platforms, obviously in the Ariba space, was always how the focus tended to be always on the upfront, the requisition, the PO, the approval flows. And embarrassingly, and I'm sure I was guilty of this as well, quite often AP would be left in the background and behind. So maybe if you could just kind of expand a little bit on, your thoughts around AP is not just a foundation, but frankly, one of the critical pieces of a successful procurement platform.
I always joke that procurement is the only thing standing behind, in between earnings per share and profitability and a bad business decision. But AP is really in that boat with us. So, I think the most important pieces of accounts payable are, understanding duplicate payments, making sure that someone in the company accepts what's been billed. I think that's probably the biggest issue that I see is we have people that issue POs, and when the invoice comes in, they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to approve it. They don't know how to go back and marry up. Did my statement of work and did my deliverables, were they on time? Did I accept them? Is it okay to go ahead and pay this $50,000 invoice? That's basically a third of what they're charging me. Did I really get a third of my services? So I think AP is really one of those unknowns that people don't understand, but they're just as critical as procurement, because we're not going to be able to buy anything until after an invoice is paid and the supplier is made whole. So you can actually prevent yourself from being able to get what you need by having poor AP processes.
I'd be curious to get your thoughts on how the AP process can really start to contribute to an overall cost reduction into the total cost of ownership, either with the supplier, the process, or just overall how it really fits into that source to pay path.
Sure. So what's really interesting was you start to look at the total cost of procurement from purchase orders all the way to the moment we pay an invoice. A lot of people don't think about how many times you touch that one transaction. And really that one transaction becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 6, becomes 8. And when you really start looking at what it costs us with human capital to do those things, you're really starting to drive a lot of potential for mistakes. You're driving the inability to be more efficient. You're putting yourself behind already on getting bills paid. So if you really start to look at, if I make this ROI investment to go EDI or to put a system in where my invoices are scanned and the system goes through them and matches them, you're really eliminating that human error. And I think we're all in a position right now with labor, especially, labor costs are high, even for something that we would think would be menial work, a person who's sitting there doing paper invoices, but that person impacts the profit and loss of your annual report shareholders. So I think once people start realizing that pay is just as much as a hit on your profitability line as not selling that car or not getting that product out the door by the end of the accounting year, is just as critical. And finding savings on that processing and moving away from manual is really critical to the future of how we evolve.
I think that really starts to get to some of the efficiency gains. Part of the reason I'm out in Westchester this morning, just meeting with a company, they're about 800 million to $1 billion in size, and just wrapped up a conversation with the CFO, and probably 2/3 of the conversation was focused on what I would describe as a lot of the upstream components, the sourcing, the contracting, the vendor onboarding, and then the procurement piece of it. And then it was actually the chief supply chain officer who had to remind the CFO that one of the critical challenges they were facing was the entire accounts receivable process or accounts payable process, and specifically around the approval, the reconciliation, and then frankly the tying and the tracking of that back to the PO, and starting to get away from a truly just a flat out manual process. I guess anything you would add in terms of just really some of the efficiency gains, I think, that can be brought to the AP space?
Absolutely. When you start to look at cash flow, a lot of companies, if you don't pay on time, they start trying to add interest to your invoice. And most companies our size, Corteva is roughly a $17-18 billion agricultural company, we just ignore those interest increases or the penalties. But those penalties start to add up, and if you're a small enough customer, your supplier is going to stop shipment until you actually pay those. But as I look at how do we become more efficient, it's all about cash flow, and it's all about making sure that we've got the folks who are working in our organizations pointed to value add activities, not processing invoices. But you brought up a great point, and I think the education of our customers, of procurement organizations, our internal stakeholders, of the understanding of the why do I need to make sure that I am accepting what's built builds me and the invoices, I think is really key.
Talking about cash flow, having been in the space for a long time, I know that one of the key programs, or what I'd call more advanced programs, frankly, really starts to get into discount terms management, days payable, DPO, days payable outstanding, et cetera. And all of that really starts to tie into both the efficiencies, the cash flow management piece of it as well. If you could go just a little bit deeper into the cash flow piece without having a solid accounts payable foundational process, starting to move into that more, the more advanced, truly advanced DPO, et cetera, management aspects of cash flow would be almost impossible. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so we're undergoing that challenge today. We have an older SAP system that supports part of our business. The other part of the business is in Ariba SAP. And as we deployed, and this is I jokingly call it the BA. It was the before Amy got here. Nobody really wanted to get our suppliers set up with electronic invoicing and have them marked as core, transactional, or preferred in Ariba. So now we're still getting paper invoices in, but now we're starting to transition people to the SAP Business Network. And I think as we start to look at that, we've had a ton of leakage on our payment terms. We're a 90-day payment term company. We have POs that we've changed the vendor master, but no one has done anything to update the POs that are out there. So we're still paying at the old payment terms. And the way we configured the system, vendor master doesn't override anything else. We also have too many people in buyer roles that aren't part of procurement that are changing payment terms. So I think as you really start to look at the value of how do we manage the cash flow better, using vendor master to really govern everything, operationalization of contract, pushing more towards catalogs so that people can get the benefit of those pay terms, and also making sure that your buyer roles are truly for people who should be managing the vendor days paid as well as vendor codes.
So kind of the reality is right now, Amy, we're building an AP cake. So I think as we look at that, I'm going to layer in a couple of what I would view as both foundational and then also starting to move into some of the more advanced features and functions, right? So I think obviously having a system like Ariba, the business network, tied into your ERP, whether it's SAP or really anything else, that's really going to start to grow the accuracy of the overall platform and program. Just what's coming in, is it matching, is it ticking and tying out? But as we start to really look at some of the, what I would call, and this is where I'm going to say foundational, right? So here comes another layer and then a chunk of frosting on top. So the layer I think would be really tying the compliance of the system across the board, whether that is tying it directly to a purchase order or to a contract where the spend has already been authorized and we're just moving it in. And then really looking, as you start to get into some of the more advanced capabilities, how that allows you to have more controls overall, right, over both the entire procurement platform, but then specifically how you can start to tweak things inside of an AP program. Can you expand on that, son?
So I think foundationally, as you're looking at putting that program in place, it's really about the handoff and ensuring, Sarbanes-Oxley. I know a lot of people don't remember Sarbanes-Oxley. I do, but making sure that the three legs of the stool of the PO, the invoice, and the price, and then you throw in the complexity of countries. How do we manage currency in SAP? Exchange rates are correct. How do we make sure that someone, DOA, delegation of authority, can actually sign for that PO or sign for that invoice? And I think really looking at what are the processes, compliance for your company, and how do you integrate, that automation of that is going to make. And I really think that leadership DOA approvals, they start to understand who's really making the business decisions within the company.
No, 100%. I think that, especially from the controls, visibility, I think you did. I think that's, I think you kind of laid out, frankly, I think you laid out how it's critical. I think obviously there's a lot going on in the procurement space in general, certainly in the accounts payable space as well, especially when we start to think about, some of the future trends. Obviously, there's just a lot moving in this space. So as a practitioner, obviously with a company that's 12x the size of the one I was just speaking to this morning, I'd be curious what your thoughts are, or what kind of gets you excited when you start to think about either trends or really some of the innovations that are starting to come down the pipe in the AP space overall. Just get your thoughts on that.
So I think the most exciting thing that I see in AP is we're starting to look at the data that and making sure that what is coded for either UNSP codes or commodity codes actually, it's not just about, okay, we're going to make sure that Joe's engine block company is tied to MRO for spare parts, but maybe he's doing cleaning services. So you have one vendor code, but two different categories. And how do you know which invoice is applicable to which? Then how to turn that data and make sure that you can action on that data. So I think to me the maturity as well as data categorization is really where we're headed, and it's every couple months.
Yeah, the AI comment there. I had a feeling that that dirty two-letter word would come up at some point. It's I think the crazy thing about that, and I know that I've kind of fallen to this, is that you made the comment around 2 months. I think the compression there, frankly, in our industry is going to continue. I think that we will start to see changes occurring on a monthly, weekly, almost a daily basis, especially with the amount of compute that's kind of coming online. And in terms of some of the advancements you just mentioned, what are your thoughts just in terms of, hey, how can an organization start to prepare to integrate or kind of lay the groundwork to start to be able to take advantage of some of these advancements if they already have a really robust, or what I would call foundational AP platform set up already?
So as I look at it, I'm looking at my biggest suppliers first, and we build a matrix really of, if we're going to automate, we need it to be suppliers that have lots of transactions, as well as of our large spend suppliers. So we can look at that two different ways. So I think really looking at your suppliers and understanding who's embracing technology, who has a lot of transactions, and who's most apt to lead the way for your other vendors is really where you want to focus your efforts at when you're bringing suppliers into the automation process. I'm finding that a lot of companies will say, yeah, we're part of the SAP Business Network, but nobody ever sends us anything on it. And that just blows my mind, because I'm like, here we have all this capability and people are just ignoring it. But I'm definitely focused on it now. I have my teams looking at the top 10 suppliers by their commodity / category and subcategories every 10 days. So I expect them to review a supplier a day and get them launched into not only the classification and get them activated in SAP, but also deploying the SAP Business Network to be automated.
Very cool. So the next one's going to be a 2-part question, because I feel like it's a Supreme Court conversation at this point. So part A would be, as a company that is just beginning their AP journey, are there any recommendations or thoughts that you can give them around, what can kind of define success or what they should look for? And then the part B to that question would be, for those that are more advanced or that have, frankly, a solid platform in place already, where should they start to look or explore for opportunities to further improve?
The flow process of, what does it look like today, and what do you want it to look like tomorrow? And then they go hand in hand is the change management piece for employees, because you're going to have a whole population of AP employees think they're going to lose their job. That's going to be the biggest hurdle, is change, and making sure that people understand the flow process of what happens and who do I call when. If you're at a much more advanced stage and doing this for several years, I encourage you to go back.
In that, and it's kind of the flip side of that, so opportunities, etc. I think the other side of it, are there any common pitfalls that you would kind of say, hey, let's, keep an eye out for this in terms of, something that they may run across.
They could come back in 6 months and say, which is basically been upon payment according to pay terms against a correct itemized invoice. That could be anywhere from 8 to 15 days of cash flow for your company.
I love that you mentioned the with them factor, the what's in it for me or the what's in it for them piece of it. As we just kind of wrap up here, just overall, are there any additional thoughts that you would just, share kind of across the board, APay, or how it plugs into the automation, or really anything else on that?
So interestingly enough, I worked in APay very early in my career, and I thought it was the dumbest thing I had to do was to write on paper invoices how to get something coded. Little did I know, as I went into legal and started doing contracts, that accounts payable knowledge of how we pay bills was really foundational. I knew what I could negotiate and not negotiate in contracts, and it made sense to me how we paid bills as a company. And then to go into procurement and look at what tools I have to negotiate with, pay terms can be one of them. And that's really critical to understand what your APay process is. You pay bills, because the way you negotiate, you can actually get yourself a better deal or get yourself in hot water with your supplier. So if you've never worked in APay or you've never really dealt with APay other than a phone call to say, why isn't this paid? I encourage everyone to go spend 5 or 6 hours just sitting side by side with someone, either virtually or in person, and see how the process works and see what the mistakes are. Suppliers make mistakes too. So invoice rejection, some people actually send them back to the suppliers with a note. Other people just trash them. What does your company do? What risk are you at if those invoices don't get booked and paid? So just, I want people to have an appreciation for APay because it's not an easy job. And we don't sometimes put enough value on it, but it's important to learn what they do and understand the process.
So I just wanted to say thank you very much, Amy, for jumping on here and walking through this with it. To all the participants, really, really appreciate everyone joining us today. Looking forward to continuing the conversation throughout the rest of the summer as we go through these different conversations, and looking forward to our next conversation.